Commander Marcus Cole could taste blood in his mouth as he stood in the center of the Grand Colosseum of Vethra Prime, and the roar of 50,000 aliens filled his ears like thunder. He had done it. Against all odds, against every prediction, against the betting pools that had given him a 1% chance of survival, he had won the Trial of Champions. His body was covered in wounds, and his left arm hung at a bad angle. But none of that mattered now, because the crowd was chanting something in their clicking insectoid language, and even though he could not understand the words, he knew what they meant. Champion. The Archon of Vethra rose from his throne high above the arena floor, and Marcus had to crane his neck to look at the massive creature that ruled this world. The Archon stood 12 feet tall, his body covered in a hard shell that gleamed like polished obsidian, and living jewels crawled across his chest and shoulders like tiny, glowing insects. His voice boomed across the Colosseum, through speakers that made the air vibrate. "Human," the Archon announced, and the translation device in Marcus's ear converted the clicking sounds into words he could understand. "You have done what no off-worlder has done in 300 years, and you have earned the ancient rights of a champion." Marcus straightened his back despite the pain, because he knew that 200 human prisoners were watching from the slave pits beneath the arena, and they needed to see him stand tall. Those prisoners were the reason he had entered this brutal competition in the first place. 6 months ago, a Dominion raiding party had attacked a human colony on the Outer Rim and taken 200 civilians as slaves, and when the Earth government had tried to negotiate their release, the Dominion had laughed and said that humans had nothing worth trading. But there was one way to free slaves in Dominion space. That did not require payment. The Trial of Champions. Any being from any species could enter, and if they survived the gauntlet of combat, puzzles, and tests that had killed thousands before them, they could claim the freedom of prisoners equal to their own worth. Marcus had been rated as worth exactly 200 slaves by the Dominion assessors, and so he had fought and bled and nearly died a dozen times to earn their freedom. "Your prisoners will be released," the Archon continued, and Marcus felt relief wash through his broken body like cool water. "But first, you must receive your personal prize, as is tradition." The Archon raised one of his 4 arms, and a massive gate on the far side of the arena began to open. "A champion may claim any female from our collection as his own," the Archon declared, and Marcus could hear excitement building in the crowd. "And we have gathered the finest specimens from across the galaxy for your selection." Marcus watched as hundreds of females began walking into the arena, guided by armed guards, and he felt his stomach turn at the sight. They were slaves. Some were from species he recognized, and others were from worlds he had never heard of, but all of them had been taken from their homes and turned into property to be given away as prizes. The Archon began describing them like items at an auction. "Here we have Princess Velnara of the Shifting Sands, whose bioluminescent skin can display any color you desire, and whose pheromones can bring pleasure beyond imagination." A tall female with glowing blue skin walked forward and posed for the crowd, and the aliens cheered. "And here is Lady Christine of the Mirror World, whose body was engineered for perfect symmetry down to the molecular level, and whose beauty has started wars between systems." Another female stepped forward, and Marcus had to admit that she was stunning by any standard, with features so perfect they almost looked artificial. One by one, the Archon presented females of incredible beauty and value, and with each one, the crowd grew more excited to see which the human champion would choose. But Marcus was not looking at the beautiful ones. His eyes had found something else entirely. In the far corner of the arena, kept separate from the others, there was a hunched figure with gray mottled skin and a face covered in scars. The other slaves stayed away from her like she carried a disease, and the guards looked at her with disgust whenever they passed. She knelt on the ground with her head down, and she seemed to be trying to make herself as small as possible. Marcus watched her carefully while the Archon continued his presentation, and he noticed something strange. Every few seconds, the gray female would glance up, and her eyes would move across the arena with quick, precise movements. Looked down again. She was not looking at the crowd or the other slaves. She was looking at the guards, counting them, tracking their positions, noting the weapons they carried. And when the Archon made a joke in HFY, the most complex language in the galaxy, she reacted a full second before the translation came through the speakers. She understood HFY. That should have been impossible, because that language took most species 20 years to learn. And this female was listed in the arena registry as Defective Unit 7, with an intelligence rating of barely functional. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine as he realized what he was seeing. This female was not defective at all. She was hiding. And now, champion, the Archon's voice boomed across the arena, make your choice and claim your prize. The crowd fell silent in anticipation. Every eye in the Colosseum was on Marcus as he looked across the hundreds of beautiful females before him. Princesses and engineered beauties and daughters of conquered kings, all waiting to see which of them would be chosen by the human who had done the impossible. Marcus raised his hand and pointed. That one, he said, and his voice carried across the silent arena, the gray one in the corner. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the Archon made a sound that the translator rendered as laughter, and the entire Colosseum erupted in howling amusement. 50,000 aliens laughed at the stupid human who had just made the worst trade in the history of the Trial of Champions. The Archon's jeweled body shook with mirth as he spoke. Surely you are joking, human, for that creature is worthless, and you could have any female in this arena. I am not joking, Marcus replied calmly, and I have made my choice. The laughter grew even louder. Aliens were falling out of their seats, amusement, and some were recording the moment on their devices to share across the galaxy. The human champion, they would say, the one who survived the impossible trials, chose the ugliest, most worthless slave in the entire collection. What a fool! But Marcus did not care about their laughter, because he had seen what nobody else had seen. Behind those dull, downcast eyes, something was watching. Something intelligent. Something dangerous. And he intended to find out what it was. The guards brought the gray female forward, and she kept her head down and her shoulders hunched as they pushed her toward Marcus. Congratulations, human, the Archon said, still laughing. You have claimed your prize, worthless as she may be, and may you enjoy your defective creature. Marcus looked at the female standing before him, and for just a moment her eyes flicked up to meet his. In that brief instant, he saw something that made his heart race. Intelligence, calculation, and just the faintest hint of hope. Then her eyes went dull again, and she returned to playing her role. Marcus smiled. This was going to be very interesting indeed. The transport ship hummed softly as it carried Marcus and his crew away from Vethra Prime, and the 200 freed prisoners were celebrating in the cargo hold below. But Marcus sat alone in his private quarters with the gray female. She had not spoken a single word since they left the arena, and she sat in the corner of the room with her head down and her arms wrapped around her knees, like she was trying to disappear. Marcus watched her from his chair across the room, and he could see the scars that covered her face and neck, deep lines that looked like they had been made by claws or blades. Her skin was a dull gray color that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and her body was thin and hunched in a way that made her look weak and broken. But Marcus had not survived 30 years as a military commander by trusting what his eyes told him. He had learned long ago that the most dangerous enemies were often the ones who looked harmless. "You can drop the act," he said quietly, "because nobody is watching us here." The female did not respond. She kept her head down and her body still, like she had not heard him at all. Marcus leaned forward in his chair. "In the arena," he continued, "when the Archon made that joke about the senator from the Void Worlds, you smiled before the translation came through the speakers. And that joke was in High Vetheri, which means you understand a language that takes most species 20 years to learn." Still no response. "And when the guards changed positions," Marcus added, "your eyes tracked every single one of them, and you noted exactly where they were standing and what weapons they were carrying. And that is not something a brain-damaged defective would do." The female remained motionless. Marcus sighed and stood up from his chair. "Look," he said, walking toward the door, "I did not choose you because I wanted a slave or a servant or a prize to show off, and I am going to give you your freedom papers as soon as we reach human space. But I need to know if you are a threat to my crew or my ship." He paused at the door. "If you are hiding from someone, I can help you, but only if you trust me enough to tell me the truth." He waited for a long moment, but the female said nothing. Marcus shook his head and reached for the door control, but before he could touch it, a voice spoke behind him. "Why did you choose me?" The voice was soft and clear, nothing like the mumbling broken sounds she had made in the arena, and Marcus turned around to find the female looking directly at him. Her eyes were no longer dull and empty. They were sharp and bright, filled with an intelligence that seemed almost too vast to be contained in such a small body. "Because you were the only one in that arena who was thinking instead of performing," Marcus replied. "Because I wanted to know what someone with your obvious intelligence was doing, pretending to be worthless." The female studied him for a long moment, and Marcus felt like he was being examined by something far older and far more powerful than he had expected. "You are either very clever," she said finally, "or very foolish, and I have not yet decided which." "Most people say both," Marcus replied with a slight smile. The female made a sound that might have been a laugh, and then she slowly unfolded herself from the corner and stood up. Marcus watched in amazement as her posture changed completely. The hunched shoulders straightened, the weak trembling limbs became still and controlled, and suddenly she was standing tall with a grace that seemed almost royal. "My name is Kethvira," she said, "and I am the last surviving member of the Navigator species, which your Dominion masters believe they exterminated 200 years ago." Felt his breath catch in his throat. The Navigators. Every spacefaring species in the galaxy knew the legends of the Navigators, the ancient race of engineers and scientists whose technology had been centuries ahead of everyone else. They had built ships that could cross the galaxy in days, weapons that could crack planets in half, and medical devices that could cure any disease and extend life for centuries. And then, the Dominion had decided that such power was too dangerous to exist outside their control, and they had launched a war of extermination that had supposedly wiped out every last navigator in existence. "That is impossible," Marcus whispered, "because the Dominion hunted your people for 50 years, and they claimed they killed every single one." "They killed almost every single one," Kethvira corrected, "but I survived by doing something that no navigator had ever done before." She gestured at her scarred gray face. "Myself worthless." Marcus stared at her in confusion. "I do not understand," he admitted. Kethvira walked to the small window and looked out at the stars. "My people were proud," she explained, "and our beauty was famous across the galaxy, with silver-traced skin that mapped star systems, and eyes that held the light of nebulae. And we could not imagine hiding what we were." She touched the scars on her face. "But I watched my family die because they refused to hide, and I decided that survival was more important than pride. So I scarred my own face to destroy my beauty, and I suppressed my bioluminescence until my skin turned gray and dull. and I learned to walk and talk like someone whose brain had been damaged beyond repair." Her voice was calm, but Marcus could hear the pain beneath the words. "For 60 years, she continued, I have moved through Dominion slave pits and auction houses and work camps, and nobody ever looked twice at me. The ugly, broken thing in the corner. Because in a society that values only beauty and power, worthlessness is the perfect camouflage." Marcus shook his head in amazement. 60 years, he repeated. "And you never broke character? Not once?" "I broke character once," Kethvira admitted, "when I was young and foolish, and I let a kind guard see that I could read, and the next day that guard was dead, and I was being transported to an interrogation facility." She turned to face Marcus. "I escaped, but I learned my lesson, and I have not made that mistake again until today." "Why today?" Marcus asked. "Why trust me?" Kethvira studied him with those bright, ancient eyes. "Because you are the first person in 60 years who saw me," she said simply. "Not the broken creature I pretended to be, but the person hiding beneath the disguise." She walked closer to Marcus. "Every other being who looked at me saw what they expected to see. A worthless, defective thing not worth their attention. But you looked at me and saw something else. And that tells me something important about your species." "What does it tell you?" Marcus asked. "It tells me that humans judge by substance rather than surface," Kethvira replied, "and that makes you very different from every other species I have encountered, and it makes you potentially very dangerous to the Dominion." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine at the intensity in her eyes. "I have a proposal for you, Commander Marcus Cole," Kethvira said, "and I think you will find it very interesting." "I am listening," Marcus replied. Kethvira smiled, and for the first time, Marcus could see the ghost of the beauty she had destroyed to survive. "I know the location of the Navigator Archives," she said, "the hidden repository where my people stored the sum total of all our knowledge and technology before the Dominion found us, and I want to take you there." Marcus felt his heart begin to race. "Why me?" he asked. "Why humanity?" "Because you chose the ugly one," Kethvira replied, "and that choice told me everything I needed to know about what kind of people you are." She extended her hand in a gesture she had clearly learned from watching humans. "Do we have a deal, Commander?" Marcus looked at her hand, then at her eyes, and then he smiled and reached out to shake it. "We have a deal," he said. And in that moment, without knowing it, they changed the course of galactic history. 3 months had passed since Marcus brought Kethvira aboard his ship, and in that time, everything had changed. The crew had been suspicious at first, whispering behind Marcus's back about his strange choice in the arena. But those whispers had stopped completely, once they saw what Kethvira could do. She had redesigned their engine systems in a single afternoon, increasing fuel efficiency by 40%, with modifications that human engineers said should have been impossible. She had fixed their medical bay equipment, using nothing but spare parts and a welding torch, and now their healing machines worked better than the most advanced hospitals on Earth. And she had cracked the Dominion's military communication codes in 3 days, a task that human intelligence agencies had been working on for 20 years, without success. "How is this possible?" Admiral Chen asked through the holographic display in Marcus's office. Awe and disbelief. "Our best cryptographers have been trying to break those codes since the First War, and she did it in 72 hours. Marcus glanced at Kethvira, who sat in the corner of the room reviewing star charts on a data pad. "Navigator technology was always centuries ahead of everyone else," he explained. "And Kethvira may be the last of her kind, but she carries all of their knowledge in her head." The Admiral leaned forward. "The Council wants to meet her," she said, "and they want to discuss this archive she mentioned, because if it contains even a fraction of what she claims, it could change everything." "I understand," Marcus replied, "but Kethvira will only deal with people she trusts, and right now, that list is very short." "Then expand the list," the Admiral ordered, "because we need what she knows, and we need it before the Dominion realizes what they gave away. The hologram flickered and disappeared, turned to find Kethvira watching him with those bright knowing eyes. "Your admiral is afraid," she observed. "Can you blame her?" Marcus asked. "The Dominion has been pushing into human territory for decades, and we have been losing ground slowly but steadily. And that suddenly we have a chance to change the balance of power." Kethvira set down her datapad and walked to the window. "Your people are not ready for what the archives contain," she said quietly. "What do you mean?" Marcus asked. Kethvira was silent for a long moment. "My people made mistakes," she finally said, "and we created technologies that we should not have created. Weapons that could destroy entire star systems, and machines that could manipulate the fabric of reality itself." She turned to face Marcus. "The Dominion wanted those weapons, and when we refused to give them, they decided to take them by force, and we chose to hide our knowledge rather than let it fall into their hands." "But you are offering that knowledge to us," Marcus pointed out. "I am offering some of it," Kethvira corrected. "The parts that can help your people without destroying them. But there are things in those archives that must never be released. Things that could end all life in this galaxy if they fell into the wrong hands." Marcus felt a chill at her words. "Can I trust you to make that decision?" he asked honestly. "Because you are asking me to bring my people to a vault of unimaginable power and then let you decide what we can and cannot have." Kethvira smiled sadly. "That is the right question," she said, "and I am glad you asked it, because it shows that you understand the weight of what we are about to do." She walked closer to him. "I have watched your species for 60 years, she said, "hiding in slave pits and work camps across Dominion space. And I have seen human prisoners share their food with each other, when they were starving. And I have seen human parents sacrifice themselves to save children who were not even their own. And I have seen human soldiers refuse to betray their companions, even under torture." Her eyes glistened with something that might have been tears. "Your people are not perfect," she continued, "and you have your share of cruelty and greed and selfishness. But you also have something that the Dominion lacks completely." "What is that?" Marcus asked. "Compassion," Kethvira replied, "and the ability to see worth in things that others dismiss as worthless." She reached out and touched his hand. "You chose me when everyone else laughed," she said, "and that one act of seeing beyond the surface tells me more about humanity than 60 years of observation ever could." Marcus felt the weight of her trust settle onto his shoulders. "I will not betray that trust," he promised. "I know," Kethvira replied. "That is why I am going to show you something that I have never shown anyone." She stepped back and closed her eyes. Marcus watched in amazement as her gray skin began to change. Silver lines appeared across her face and arms, tracing patterns that looked like star maps and mathematical equations, and her dull eyes brightened until they seemed to contain entire galaxies. The scars on her face faded, not disappearing completely, but somehow becoming part of the pattern, and her hunched posture straightened into something regal and beautiful. "This is what a navigator truly looks like," she said, and her voice seemed to resonate with harmonics that made the air vibrate. "And this is what I have been hiding for 60 years. Marcus stared at her in wonder. She was not beautiful by human standards, not in the conventional way that the other slaves in the arena had been beautiful, but she was striking in a way that went beyond physical appearance. She looked like a living map of the universe, like someone who carried the secrets of creation in her very skin. "The silver traces are knowledge pathways," Kethvira explained, "and they contain the accumulated wisdom of 1,000 generations of navigators. Everything we ever learned about science and mathematics and the nature of reality itself." She held up her hand, and the silver lines on her palm glowed brighter. "With this knowledge, I could build a ship that travels faster than light without engines, or a power source that draws energy from the space between dimensions, or a weapon that could make a star go dark. Her hand fell. And that is why I had to hide, she said. Because if the Dominion knew what I carry inside me, they would tear me apart to extract it. And everything my people died to protect would fall into the hands of monsters. Marcus understood now why she had been so careful. Archives, before they figure out what you are, he said. Kethvira nodded. The Dominion thinks they gave away a worthless defective, she said. And by the time they realize their mistake, it will be too late. She let her appearance fade back to the scarred gray disguise she had worn for so long. But we must move quickly, she warned, because I have spent 60 years preparing for this moment, and I will not let anything stop us now. Marcus nodded and moved to the communication console. Admiral Chen, he said, when the connection opened, tell the Council to prepare a fleet, because we are going to retrieve something that will change the course of the war. The Admiral's eyes widened. What did she tell you? She demanded. Marcus looked at Kethvira and smiled. She told me that humanity just became the most important species in the galaxy, he replied, and the Dominion does not even know it yet. Navigator Archives had begun. The story of Marcus Cole and his worthless prize had spread across the Dominion like wildfire, and everyone was laughing. In the great halls of Vethra Prime, the Archon told the story at every feast and celebration, mimicking the stupid human who had traded a princess for a defective. On entertainment networks across 1,000 worlds, comedians performed skits about the foolish commander who could not tell the difference between treasure and trash. Merchants sold commemorative tokens showing a human pointing at an ugly gray creature, while beautiful females stood ignored behind him. The joke became so famous that choosing the gray one became a common phrase, meaning to make a catastrophically bad decision. Nobody was laughing 6 months later. The first sign that something had changed came when human ships began appearing in places they should not have been able to reach. A Dominion supply convoy was ambushed in a sector that was supposed to be 3 weeks away from the nearest human base. But the human fleet arrived in only 4 days and destroyed every ship before reinforcements could arrive. Dominion intelligence officers were baffled. Their engines have not changed, one analyst reported to his superiors, but somehow they are traveling 70% faster than before, and we cannot figure out how. The second sign came when human spies began accessing Dominion communications that had been encrypted with codes that should have been unbreakable. Military plans were leaked, secret research was stolen, informants were identified and arrested before they could deliver their reports. Someone has cracked our encryption, the Dominion Security Minister announced to the High Council. And we have no idea how, because our best mathematicians say it should have taken them another century to develop the necessary algorithms. Surviving wounds that should have killed them. Medical reports from captured battlefields showed that human troops were being equipped with healing devices that could repair fatal injuries in minutes. Technology that was centuries beyond anything humanity should have possessed. The Dominion High Council met in emergency session to discuss the sudden shift in the balance of power. Where is this technology coming from? The council leader demanded, slamming his fist on the table. We do not know, the intelligence minister admitted, but our analysts have identified one common factor in all of these changes. He activated a holographic display that showed an image of a human ship. This vessel, he said, belonging to Commander Marcus Cole, the human who won the Trial of Champions on Vethra Prime. The Archon of Vethra shifted uncomfortably in his seat. What about it? He asked. Every major technological advancement the humans have made in the past 6 months can be traced back to this ship, the intelligence minister explained. And our sources say that Commander Cole has been working with an unknown alien advisor. What kind of alien? The council leader asked. We do not know, the minister admitted, but the description is strange, a gray-skinned female with scars on her face and an apparent mental deficiency. The Archon felt his blood turn cold. That is impossible, he whispered. Every eye in the council chamber turned to him. What do you mean? The council leader demanded. The Archon's voice trembled as he spoke. At the trial of champions, he said, Commander Cole was offered any female from our collection as his prize, princesses and engineered beauties and daughters of conquered kings, and he chose the ugliest, most worthless slave we had, a gray defective that we had been trying to dispose of for years. The council chamber fell, silent. We laughed at him, the Archon continued, and I told the story at every feast because I thought it was the funniest thing I had ever seen. A stupid human who could not tell value from garbage. The intelligence minister's face had gone pale. Pull up the registry information on that slave, he ordered his assistant. A moment later, a holographic file appeared showing the registration details for Defective Unit 7. The file was almost empty. Origin unknown, the minister read aloud. Species unidentified. Intelligence rating minimal. Market value 0. Notes indicate subject has been in Dominion custody for approximately 60 years with no record of original capture. 60 years? The council leader repeated. How can we have no information on a slave we have held for 60 years? The intelligence minister was already running calculations in his head. 200 years ago, he said slowly, we exterminated the navigator species and seized all their technology, but we never found their central archives, the repository where they stored their most advanced knowledge. He looked at the Archon with horror in his eyes. What if we did not kill all of them? He asked. What if one survived by hiding in plain sight, making herself worthless so that nobody would look at her twice? The council chamber erupted in chaos. Find that ship, the council leader roared. Send every fleet we have, and bring me that human and his gray female. But it was already too late. 3 days later, Commander Marcus Cole led a human fleet to a hidden location in the Void Reaches, a sector of space so dangerous that no one had explored it in centuries. The Navigator archives were waiting for them, hidden inside an artificial planet that had been disguised as a dead rock for 200 years. The archives contained more knowledge and technology than the Dominion had accumulated in its entire history. Kethvira walked through the ancient halls with tears streaming down her face, touching the walls that her ancestors had built, reading the messages they had left for whoever might find this place. They knew someone would come eventually, she told Marcus, and they left instructions for how to use everything safely, what should be shared and what should remain hidden. Marcus watched as human scientists began cataloging the treasures around them, their faces showing a mixture of awe and disbelief. This is going to change everything, he said. Yes, Kethvira agreed, but not in the way the Dominion fears. She turned to face him. My people created terrible weapons, she said, but they also created wonderful things, cures for diseases that have plagued the galaxy for millennia, power sources that could provide free energy to entire planets, technologies that could terraform dead worlds and make them bloom with life. She gestured at the vast archive around them. The Dominion wanted the weapons, she said, but you wanted me, and that is why I am going to give humanity the wonders instead. Marcus felt his heart swell with pride. What about the weapons? He asked. Kethvira smiled. We will not need them, she said, because by the time the Dominion realizes what has happened, every species they have ever conquered will have access to technology that makes them impossible to oppress. She looked at the ancient walls of the archive. My people died to protect this knowledge, she said, and now it will be used to free every slave and liberate every conquered world in the galaxy. She turned back to Marcus. And it all happened because you chose the ugly one, she said, and the crowd laughed. Marcus smiled. I would make the same choice 1,000 times, he said. I know, Kethvira replied, is exactly why I chose you. The war for the future of the galaxy had begun, and humanity was going to win it, not with weapons, but with wisdom. The war lasted 3 years, but it was not the kind of war the Dominion had expected. They had prepared for battles and invasions, and the brutal conquest they had perfected over centuries of expansion. But instead, they found themselves fighting something they could not understand. Their slave populations began disappearing, not through violence or rebellion, but through technology that humanity was distributing freely across the galaxy. Medical devices that removed tracking implants, communication systems that let resistance groups coordinate across star systems, and transportation networks that moved refugees to safety faster than Dominion forces could respond. Their conquered worlds began demanding independence. Species that had been crushed under Dominion rule for generations suddenly had access to defensive technologies that made occupation impossible, and the cost of maintaining control became greater than the benefit of keeping them. Territory. Their economy began to collapse. The Dominion had built their entire civilization on the labor of slaves and the resources of conquered worlds. And when those foundations started crumbling, everything built on top of them began to fall. One by one, the great powers of the Dominion began suing for peace. They had no choice, and through it all, the name on every tongue was the same: the Navigator Ascendant, the last of her kind, the worthless gray slave who had brought the mightiest empire in the galaxy to its knees. The Peace Summit was held on a neutral station in the space between human territory and what remained of Dominion control, and representatives from 100 species gathered to witness the end of an era. Commander Marcus Cole walked into the great chamber with Kethvira at his side, and every eye turned to watch them. Marcus had changed in the 3 years since the Trial of Champions, his hair touched with gray now, and new scars marking his face from battles fought across the galaxy. But his eyes were still sharp, and his back was still straight. And Kethvira, she no longer wore the disguise of the broken gray defective. Her silver-traced skin gleamed in the light of the chamber, mapping star systems and mathematical equations in patterns that seemed to shift and flow as she moved. And her eyes held the light of nebulae as she looked across the assembly. She was beautiful, not in the artificial way of the engineered slaves who had been paraded before Marcus in the arena, but in a way that spoke of depth and wisdom and the weight of centuries. The former Archon of Vethra was there, stripped of his living jewels and his position of power, forced to attend as a witness to the humiliation of his civilization. He could not meet Kethvira's eyes as she took her place at the head of the chamber. 3 years ago, Kethvira began. Across the assembly with perfect clarity, I stood in an arena on Vethra Prime, surrounded by thousands of beings who saw me as worthless. She looked at the Archon, and he flinched. I was listed in your registries as Defective Unit 7, she continued, with an intelligence rating of barely functional and a market value of 0. And you kept me in your slave pits for 60 years without ever looking closely enough to see what I really was. The Archon's face burned with shame. She continued, You could have sold me to any collector, Kethvira said, or given me to any warlord or scientist who might have bothered to examine me properly, and if you had, you might have discovered my secret before it was too late. She gestured at the assembly around her. But your arrogance made you careless, she declared, because in a society that values only surface appearances, you never bothered to look beneath them. And you gave me away as a joke, silent. And then a human came along, Kethvira continued, and her voice softened as she turned to look at Marcus. A human who had just survived trials that should have killed him, who had earned the right to claim any prize he wanted, and who chose the ugliest, most worthless thing in the entire arena. Marcus smiled. Your people laughed at him, Kethvira said, turning back to the assembly, and you made jokes, and recorded videos, and told the story at feasts across the galaxy. But while you were laughing, he was listening. She stepped forward. He asked me why I understood High Vithari, she said, and he asked me why I was tracking the guards instead of watching the spectacle, and he asked me what I was hiding from. Her eyes swept across the chamber. No one had asked me those questions in 60 years, she said, because no one had ever bothered to look closely enough to see that they should be asked. Before the assembly, that is the difference between your civilization and his, she declared. You judge by surface, and humans judge by substance. You see only what you expect to see, and humans look for what is actually there. The Archon finally found his voice. We were fools, he admitted, and his words were bitter with regret, and we laughed at the wrong person. Yes, Kethvira agreed, you were fools, but not because you underestimated me. She shook her head. You were fools because you built an entire civilization on the idea that worth can be measured by appearances, she said, and that those who look weak or ugly or broken have nothing to offer. She gestured at the representatives of the freed species who had gathered for the summit. How many geniuses have you crushed in your slave pits because they did not look impressive? She asked. How many artists and scientists and philosophers have you worked to death because you judged them by their look? They did not meet your standards of beauty. And how many worlds have you destroyed because their people did not seem valuable enough to preserve? The Archon had no answer. Humanity is not perfect, Kethvira continued, and they have their own history of judging by appearances and undervaluing those who are different. But they are learning. She looked at Marcus with warmth in her ancient eyes, and when it mattered most, she said, one human looked at the ugliest slave in the arena and saw something worth choosing, and that single act of seeing beyond the surface changed the history of the galaxy. The peace terms were signed that day, and the Dominion agreed to release every slave and withdraw from every conquered world in exchange for being allowed to survive. It was the greatest victory humanity had ever achieved, and it had been won not with weapons, but with wisdom. As Marcus and Kethvira walked out of the summit chamber together, Archon caught up with them in the corridor. Wait, he called, and they turned to face him. The Archon looked at Kethvira with something that might have been respect. I have to know, he said, was it all worth it, hiding for 60 years, pretending to be worthless, waiting for someone who might never come? Kethvira smiled. I asked myself that question every day, she admitted, and there were times when I almost gave up, when I thought that no one would ever see past the disguise, and that I would die in a slave pit with my knowledge lost forever. She reached out and took Marcus's hand. But then he came, she said, and he looked at me when everyone else looked away, and he chose me when everyone else laughed. And in that moment, I knew that my people had not died in vain. The Archon nodded slowly. You have taught us a lesson we will never forget, he said. I hope so, Kethvira replied, because it is a lesson we must carry forward. Worth learning. She and Marcus turned and walked away, and the Archon watched them go. The ugly gray slave and the foolish human who had chosen her. Together they had brought down an empire. And as Kethvira had said, it had all started because one person had looked beneath the surface and seen something worth saving. That was the human way, and that was why they had won.